special edition Booster Baseball Network podcast that I guess maybe I'll call Arbitration Consternation. My name is Ron Collins, and I'm the general manager of the Yellow Springs 9, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here this afternoon talking about arbitration as it applies to pretty much all of our BBA ball clubs. We're here at the end of 2035 and moving into the off-season of 2036, so you see a lot of teams are needing to make some somewhat important decisions. And so I thought it would be a fun way to spend 20 or 30 minutes or however long it takes us to kind of walk through each of the teams. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to focus on mostly the big ticket items. And I'm going to start division by division and go from the bottom upward. So, for example, I think I'll start here with the Johnson League Atlantic, which means that I get to knock down Charm City here first, which makes this a fairly quick and easy team because Charm City, as we know, has kind of emptied the register of their big ticket items in their rebuild process. And so really they just have one guy that's barely kind of even qualifies, and that's, who is that, Mario Contreras, yes, relief pitcher. Looks like he's due $1 million, would probably expect him to get that, and we'll see whether Brandon actually offers that arbitration case or not. Would they all be as simple as the Charm City one, then this would be a completely super quick podcast. But we're going to move on then into Atlantic City. And Atlantic City has Joshua Biddle there in Atlantic City has a couple of interesting cases, not huge ones as far as that goes. Probably the simplest one is Pablo Figueroa, starting pitcher, who's due $2.9 million. I'm wondering whether he'll even be tendered. Ricardo Hernandez is a $5.5 million arbitration in his second cycle. That's probably a win for the team. And then you've got Derek Kennedy at $2.8 million, and I'm wondering whether actually Derek Kennedy will win an arbitration case and perhaps get pegged for a little bit more than 2.8. We'll see. At the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter that much to Atlantic City because their overall salary at this moment is $68 million, assuming the arbitrations that are listed there for him or for them, and if they lose a case, maybe they end up with a $70 million payroll walking into free agency. Probably not a overly worrisome moment at this stage for Atlantic City. But that does lead us pretty much straight into Montreal, which is going to be a very interesting and very fascinating case for a couple of reasons, and not the least of which is that this will be the first pass-through for brand new general manager Gary Bartle. I assume that's how you pronounce that. Sorry if I've messed that up, Gary. Coming in for John, Gary is actually faced with a collection of fairly interesting decisions to make when it comes to the arbitration table. He's got two of them up over $7 million on projected expenditures. The simple one is Gary Snyder has not been at 25 years old, has not really been a positive WAR guy. You wonder whether that would be a non-tendered arbitration or not. Charles Martin, second baseman, is in his third and final year of arbitration and is due 7.3. That looks like would probably be a win for the team. I don't see an arbitrator giving him more than that as far as it's concerned. Then at the $5 million level, you've got their second baseman, Luis Gonzalez, at 25, entering his second year. Perhaps more interesting is Jubal Troop, projected at a $5 million expenditure, but he is a Nebraska winner. It would not be too surprising to see an arbitrator give a little bit more than that $5 million, but you just never know. One does assume, though, that three of those four would definitely be tendered, and Gary Snyder probably not tendered. Manuel Pena 23-year-old starting pitcher, looks to be making about $4.8 million as he started last year. I guess he was $800K in his first year, so I assume he was a reliever before that. And perhaps the most interesting decision, I'm certain that he will be tendered as arbitration, but from an arbitration decision, you've got Robert Gowron, who's an all-power, no average kind of, no on-base percentage, I guess, really better. He just can't take a walk to sell his life. He's due $3.8 million, but he also has been averaging, 32 home runs a year for the past, 31 home runs a year for the past 2 years. Be very interesting to see what an arbitrator actually does when it comes to Robert Gowron. And again, like I said, among the things that I find most interesting about this personally is just to see how Gary is going to play it and what kind of general manager he is. I always love to watch brand new general managers come into the league and kind of get their feet wet and figure out what their own personality is going to be. And taking over Montreal as an established team is going to take Gary a little bit of time, I think, to put his own stamp on it. We'll just watch and see for a while, won't we? And talking about waiting and seeing, this brings us to Brooklyn and Allen, one of the more inventive and creative general managers in the league right now, and he has some very interesting decisions to make here. The kind of the top ones, the biggest dollar ones, are center fielder Raul Miranda, catcher Sean Smith, and third baseman and X9 in Earl Jackson. And Jackson is due $6.8 million, and given the way that he's used and the amount of time that he's playing, and his flat out his production the last year or so has not been as strong as it had been earlier in his career, it wouldn't be too surprising to see Jackson not tendered at that $6.8 million. If he is tendered, it would be shocking to see an arbitrator give him any more than that, given his performance. Same kind of thing for Raul Miranda, although the glove is awfully good, if I remember right with Raul. Let's take a look here real quick. Yeah, it's okay. You could see him making $5 million. This is his third and final arbitration cycle. But I would also not be shocked and amazed if he was not tendered. Sean Smith, on the other hand, is probably one of the most underrated catchers in the league right now, and at $5.8 million for his last arbitration year, one would think that Allen would take that in a heartbeat. So those are probably the three main items on the Brooklyn list right now, and my guess, again, is that Sean Smith is really the most impactful one. They've also got a $1.6 million arbitration case for Tony Gustafson, their shortstop. Would guess that he'll be tendered and would probably make about that much. He's a pretty nifty little shortstop. He's 24 years old and would probably see him sticking around. The bottom line is Brooklyn enters arbitration with about $106 million on their payroll, assuming that all of them are tendered and get what they're projected. So Allen is kind of playing at the top of that salary cap right now, which may wind up limiting some of what he does, and it kind of drives me to think that Earl Jackson would probably not be tendered. But we'll see what happens, right? Which, of course, then leads us to the Johnson League defending champions and the Johnson League pennant winner this year. And that is Aaron Weiner's Brockville Pikemen, who have probably the most interesting arbitration case in the league right now, and that is starting pitcher Arthur Dempster, who is got to be clearly the front runner for the Nebraska Award this year. He is entering his second year of arbitration. He is projected to make $10.6 million. Given his dominant performance, it is actually possible in my mind that you could see an arbitrator give him even more than that. You look out into the following year, 2037 is his last arbitration year. He's listed at 11.7. It wouldn't surprise me to see him get $11-12 million in arbitration this year. I mean, he's 26 years old and hitting his peak. But the arbitration process is a crapshoot. It's a pretty big deal though for Aaron, because the Rockville Pikeman overall payroll is sitting at $116 million, and that assumes he gets 10.6. Obviously, there's a lot of things that Aaron will be doing to manage that, and he's even got more arbitration cases that he can cut and or juggle in order to try to keep that down around the 110 limit. Andre Georges is the second one, $4.6 million. Another starting pitcher. Fairly important that it stay down in that 4.6, I think, for Aaron and his payroll. We'll see what happens there. Georges is an interesting case because he is one of the more effective, 16-9 last year, 3.6 ERA, one of the more effective pitchers in the league, and at 4.6, perhaps overlooked in that sense. I don't know whether he's going to be. It'll be interesting to see if Arthur Dempster gets an extra $1 million or $2 million and Georges gets another $500K or $1 million, what that will do to Aaron and his payroll plans. Other cases, relief pitcher Aaron Campbell is on his last arbitration year and due $2.4 million. Another relief pitcher, Leonardo Gonzalez, is due $1.9 million this year. Pardon me, as his second arbitration season. When you add these all up, looking down the list, you've got about $6, $8, $9, $10 million in arbitration cases. Shortstop Santiago Morales is also in his first year of arbitration at 2.4, and I would guess that Santiago Morales will get that 2.4 rather than too much more than that, but it is certainly possible he could go higher. He was a 2.1 WAR player last year. The arbitration table could be could be a thorn in Rockville's side right now. Definitely very interested to see what happens there, especially obviously around Arthur Dempster, who is kind of like one of the premium players in the league right now. So there you have the Johnson League Atlantic, where fundamentally you have the intrigue of the Dempster case and the whole Rockville salary cap issues, the brand new general manager at Montreal, and Brooklyn and Allen trying to do more of their gymnastics and see what happens there. That will lead us on. Let's go ahead and do the Johnson League Southeast, and we'll start with Nashville, going from the bottom of the table up. And not really surprising, I suppose. Nashville really doesn't have a whole lot on the table right now. They've got, a $3 million situation with second baseman Ismael Lopez, which, quite honestly, I would expect to probably not be tendered. But if he does, it doesn't really probably make a difference. They're still a year or two away from even, I think, making the plan work. Their payroll sits at $81 million roughly right now. So if they lose a couple cases or win a couple cases, that's probably not going to change that a whole lot. So I think arbitration is. There's things for Brett to be doing, but I think as an impact, it's not going to make a very big difference one way or the other as far as what his overall plans are. Louisville, on the other hand, and Nigel Laverick in Louisville, taking over for the Genius, has a little bit of a different situation going on. He actually has two very interesting situations. The first is more cut and dried, and that's Gabriel Talamonte. Their second baseman is due $7.5 million. My guess would be he'll get that one way or the other, and that's a tender without any problem. The second one is clearly a tender also, and that is starting pitcher Kevin Morales, who was the Nebraska winner last year, right? Back when he was still in the Heartland. And he is projected at $6.3 million next year in his first year of arbitration. That will be another interesting one in the sense that seems low to me. My guess, I'm wondering whether a arbitrator will actually give him more in that $8 million range, $7 to $8 million range. But we'll see there. At the end of the day, it probably doesn't make that much of a difference to Nigel, again, because they're down at $92 million. I think their budget, last I remember, is still up over $120, so that won't make that much of a difference one way or the other. A couple other generally interesting ones. Felix Arroyo, their third baseman, is due $2.4 million. Not sure he'll get any more than that. The more interesting one to me is shortstop, Jamie Ramirez, right? He's entering his first year of arbitration. He's one of the slickest fielding shortstops in the league, and he does well enough with his bat. If he could actually walk, he'd probably be kind of an upper echelon, an elite level shortstop. He is due, what is that, $1.7 million. To me, that'll be kind of a bellwether. If he's up in the 2 millions or more, then perhaps the arbitrator is fielding centric. We'll see what happens there. But anyway, bottom line is, I think there are a couple of key situations here for Louisville, and if Kevin Morales does end up getting a bigger bump than expected, that may end up throwing some wrenches into Nigel's plan there in Louisville. And like Louisville, Kyle Stever in Huntsville has some interesting things going on. I think a lot of things will shake loose during this arbitration period for him. They actually have 5, 6, 7 guys, I guess, of interest when it comes down to things. Brian Sullivan, was it Layli Yalanian? I'm sure I'm butchering that name. Heinrich Peitner is another interesting case. Very solid young number 2, maybe low number 1 pitcher. Is going to be due $4.2 million. I'm very interested to see how these arbitration levels work out for these young pitchers. And then he's got Adrian Young. Juan Nicto is another young pitcher who's looking interesting and will be going into a Super 2 season. So he's projected at $3.2 million this year, and then has 3 more arbitrations coming along. He's at, 2 years and 166 days of service. So yeah, he's clearly deeply into that Super 2 time period. Bottom line for Huntsville is that they're at $87 million of payroll right now. You know, Kyle is a total magician at dealing with any particular issues that come about, but it's possible that you could see these numbers probably will not go down any, and it's possible you could see him adding another $2 to $4 million onto his payroll just through arbitration. Unless he chooses to non-tender a few of them, which is certainly is possible. There's a couple of guys that I wonder about there as far as that's concerned. Adrian Young being one of them, has performed quite well for Las Vegas, but did not have a very solid year in 2035. So we'll see what happens there. And that will bring us up to New Orleans. Jim Roberts' team, who has another series of interesting cases. He's at $99 million of salary right now. Probably the most interesting 2 to me are Hector Amaral's case. He's 27 years old. He was Super 2 last year, so he made $5.5 million last year instead of $500K, and that bumps his number up to $8.1 million this year. And then he runs into kind of dumpster numbers, right, the next couple of years. And then catcher, is it Sin Mai? I'm certain that I'm not a Chinese individual, so I'm certain I'm getting that wrong. But he is due $7 million this year, 9.5 next, before he goes into free agency. The Crawdads also have Dave Martin at 8.1 and Jeff Mason at 7. Luke Pratt at 6.3, Luis Ortega at 5, and you keep going down. There's probably, I haven't actually added up, but it wouldn't be surprising if there's $45 million, $50 million worth of arbitration cases out there. So would not be surprising to see some of those not tender. And the bottom line risk factor is that if he gets if that team gets a few loose arbitrators signing some big checks, that $98 million in current salary could be up in the 104, 105 going into free agency, which may or may not. I don't know what Jim's overall strategies are right now, but that could have some ramifications to the Crawdads and roster management through the winter meetings and free agency time period. So another very interesting team when it comes to how arbitration is going to actually affect things for them. And then finally, of course, we're going to have to take a look at Jacksonville. And in Jacksonville's case, they have an extremely interesting situation. Tyler has already traded a couple of guys, Cavazos and, who's the other guy? It'll come to me after I'm done talking already. Mario Gonzalez, those two guys are already gone. But the salaries that get reduced based on that trade still only get them down from 133 million where they're at right now into like maybe 115. So he's got more ways to go. And to add fuel to the fire, David Navarro is due his final arbitration at $11.8 million. And you have to assume that Tyler will do whatever he can to hold on to Navarro. I just can't see him possibly dropping that case. He has some levers to pull. The team has some levers to pull. Closer Peter Grady is due $5.5 million. That might be a little bit steep for them. I don't know. Reliever James Braddock at 4.2 could definitely see that be a non-tender. Although Braddock has certainly been highly effective, it's just a question whether it's $5.5 million effective or not. So some very kind of probably gut-wrenching decisions to be made in Jacksonville. But, Tyler is like a miracle worker in keeping this team going, and I don't expect to see arbitration create any real major sidetracks for him. He'll figure something out. So, there we are with the Johnson League Southeast Division. Another set of intriguing situations where basically Nashville's a little bit dead in the water right now, but there are some very key decisions going on throughout the rest of the division. Which moves us to the Johnson League Sunbelt. Another fascinating division here with San Antonio down at the bottom, so that's where we'll start. Ultimately, San Antonio has an interesting situation in that they have to decide what to do with John Wick, the almost never-endingly injured John Wick, due $6 million in his last year of arbitration. One assumes that will be tendered and probably given at that level. Can't really see a reason for Mike not to do that. And really, I just keep my fingers crossed for John Wick because he's a guy I'd like to see actually make it through an entire season and just to see what he could do. So bottom line is I don't think you're going to see a lot of impact with San Antonio. They're in the middle or the very beginning of a rebuild, and keeping Wick around certainly can't hurt that. So that's what I expect will happen. Of course, now Wichita has a couple of interesting situations. Their big problem is that their budget is only $90 million and their current payroll sits at 82, and that's before you get into staff and things like that. So they may be a little bit constrained for their growth path. They do have two what would normally be fairly small cases in Alvin Dickinson, their center fielder, and shortstop Cario Quota. Again, apologies for the pronunciations. Dickinson is $3.6 million. Coda is $2.2. If they go even a couple million, $1 million more than that between the two of them, or $2 million, it could actually create issues to where Stu Hopkins is going to need to make some moves now. Stu is well known for being so stoic and not actually making any changes. So everything that I say there is completely is probably completely open for complete modification. But right this minute, losing a case or two in those situations could actually force his hands in different ways. And that brings us to Las Vegas, which is kind of odd to be third on the list for Vegas, third in the division. They have two interesting cases. Both of them will probably happen pretty much as they are listed. I would assume Matt is going to tender both of these guys. Hyun Sik Chang, starting pitcher, is due $6 million in his second year of arbitration. Also, second year of arbitration is Sean Huber, his mega closer, due $5 million. I would expect that given the Hustler financial situation where they're in very good control after having made several salary dump deals at the end of this past season, that both of those will be tendered and probably given at about that level. I could see Chang going a little bit higher, but probably not appreciably. And so we come to Phoenix, the upstart Phoenix Talons, working toward the playoff again for next year. They are in some what appears to be pretty comfortable budgetary standpoint. They have two cases of general interest, actually three total, with George House as a starting pitcher at $1.7 million. The most interesting cases are Tu Fu Yong, their nice young shortstop, who will be entering his first year of arbitration at a nice whopping $5.8 million projection. Actually, that seems a little high to me, but then what do I know? Super strong shortstop certainly is going to be tendered and will certainly be taken at whatever that number is. The more interesting case to me is Mario Diortez. $3.1 million certainly feels a little bit small to me. I'm going to guess that he's a $5 or $6 million player, I would have to think. Although being a DH, maybe they drop down a little bit as far as an arbitrator is concerned. It just kind of shocked me to see him at that $3 million. And of course, Sean's team news earlier on about the whole negotiation process of Diortez seems to suggest that he thinks that he's worth more also. So one never knows. At the end of the day, I'd have to take a look at Sean's budget. Let's see, he's at $94 million for a budget. So yeah, that's gonna be a little bit touchy, but he's at $61 million for the moment, so he's going to have room in free agency pretty much no matter what happens, unless Diortez gets like $12 million, and that's not going to happen. I mean, that's not going to happen. So anyway, bottom line is they've got about three interesting cases that could cause them some potential problem, but the pain level is not particularly high for Phoenix. And so we'll move on into New Mexico and talk about what Fred Holmes is going to be dealing with. If we take a look at him, he has, seven interesting cases, seven fairly big cases. Scotty Pendleton at $5.5 million is possible to go higher. I wouldn't expect that he would, but you never know. Brett Compton is also listed at 5.5. He made 4.5 last year, due $7 million the following year. His numbers dropped, so there's some likelihood that he'll stay at that 5.5 million range rather than go any higher. But he's one of those guys that can drop off a pretty big season or not. I'm sure Fred pulls his hair out at times with Brett Compton, but right fielder Chang Hyuk Chang is next at $4.8 million, and perhaps the more intriguing case is Willard Gagne is probably the right way to pronounce that. Gagne with a spoon. Willard Gagne is perhaps one of the better center fielders in the league, and dropped a 4.7 WAR season last year, and he is listed at 4.8 I just said. He's worth more than 4.6. He's worth more than that. He's going into his Super 2 year, though, so he's a good example of a case where if he would have come up even 40 days or 50 days later in the season in that first year that he came up, he may actually be saving Mexico City a little bit of money there. Not that I would ever suggest that one should manipulate service time. Far be it from any Major League Baseball team to ever do that. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, because even if you chug another $2 to $4 million onto their payroll, that would move them up into the low 70s. Mexico City is running pretty clean on an up swing during their rebuild with lots of young players. I think more interesting times come as we get another year or two into it, and you start seeing Fred dealing with some of the things that Aaron is dealing with over in Rockville. So anyway, that brings us to the end of the Johnson League Sunbelt. Actually a fairly kind of calm and quiet division, I think, where you basically see both Mexico City and Phoenix at the top of the division, and both with young teams, fairly low payroll, and probably dealing more with the fact of budgetary concerns than they are with any particular arbitration decision. So I think it's run us up to a half hour, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one the Johnson League Arbitration Consternation, and then I'll do another one here shortly around the Frick League. The Brewster Baseball Association is an out-of-the-park baseball league commissioned by Mr. America himself, Matt Rechtenwald, and competed in by 30 outstanding general managers. You've been listening to Arbitration Consternation, a special episode from the Brewster Baseball Networks. Music is Hey Mercy by Pierce Murphy and is used under Creative Commons Attribution License. Hang on for the next episode. See ya on the next rock.
It's a politician, so hey mercy, take your toll. Wait till its own dies. Count to 74. Oh, not with those green eyes. Take the pill and take some more. Hey, mercy, take your toll. Hey, mercy, get down. Hands up, I can't go on in this place. My rights, your blood. Don't catch you slipping, don't catch you slipping. Everybody say mercy. Will the young ones get to see the dawning of a greater than? Don't you make a single peep, just send thoughts and prayers to mom and dad. I could kill their guys.